Good day. I'm Giovanni Torrisi. Welcome for our chat today. Today, for Automate Critics, we are going to discuss with Alex Schafran from the University of Leeds in UK about the origins of an urban crisis, the restructuring of the San Francisco Bay Area, and the geography of foreclosure. Okay, in the meanwhile, I see that Alex Schafran is here with us. He just joined. Alex, do you want to try to speak?
I will try, I will do my best. How are you, Giovanni?
I'm very well, and we listen to you very well. We hear you very well, and I think that we can begin. I am gonna give to you the floor, and so we can have 10 minutes introduction about your article. I already introduced it for what concerns the title. So I think we are on, and everybody should be able to listen to you. So. Please, Alex, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thanks, Giovanni. It's good to be here. Hello, everybody. By way of introduction, I'm not really quite sure what to say that you don't already know from having read the article. The piece is a core portion of my dissertation work, which I'm currently in the process of turning into a book. For those of you who are interested in the specific geography of the case, or about sort of ways in which other aspects of this argument or this research have come online in the academic world, I'm happy to discuss other articles that I have written out of the same research base. But the general idea of it is actually relatively simple, that there was, in my opinion, an underemphasis on the centrality of the urban in the production of the crisis. People seem to have quickly forgotten that what became a global economic crisis started as a financial crisis, and before that it started as a foreclosure crisis. What brought Wall Street to its knees was a very specific relationship with mortgage debt, with debt produced on a very specific asset, and that was the American home. If you want to understand why all of those people took all of that bad debt, part of it has to do with the changing geographies of the American city, with this process I talk about in a very Ed Soja way as the restructuring of the American city. So that was the real goal of the article. Talk about it. There are key goals, I would say. One has to do with particular regional perspective and a way of writing about changing regions. A way of writing about things like gentrification that put gentrification in context. I think one of the biggest though I like a lot of the gentrification literature, and I think it's particularly important, gentrification is just one force, and it was important to me to be able to situate gentrification not in this broader global story of neoliberal urbanism, etc., but in a particular regional set of transformations, which I would argue are actually more relevant. So again, in a very Ed Soja-esque way, this is a bit of a plea for a meso, an in-between, and medium level engagement doesn't either fetishize the local and the neighborhood and the small scale, nor gets lost in large scale global conversations. Yeah, I think those are the key points, but I'm particularly excited engaging with everybody here. So I'm assuming that you've come with some questions. I'm just the author, you're the critic, so I believe that in fact the onus is on you. And I hope that you do. I hope that you, if there are points of contention, there are points of concern. I hope that in this forum of professionals that you feel comfortable enough asking a critical question, because there's much to criticize.
Okay, thank you, Alex, for this short but meaningful introduction. And now, as you see in the top left window, there are several people, for the time being, just one, that can raise their virtual hands. The first one is Anthony Levenda, which has raised his hand, and but he just disappeared from the screen. Anthony, would you like to speak or to write your question? I'm opening your microphone now. And can you hear us? And can you speak?
I can hear well. Can you hear me?
Fantastic.
Yes, we can. Fantastic.
Okay. I think it might be easier for me just to type my text in here. But thanks for the article, Alex. It was really excellent. I really appreciated your focus on sort of depathologizing the suburbs as just sprawled mistakes. My question is mainly around your sort of endpoint in the article, focusing on paramodern planning. So basically the question is around, is the sort of infrastructural ideal that you talk about from Graham and Marvin realizable within existing modes of urban governance? And if so, is it desirable given the historical record of high modernist planning? And so that's my main question. I was just hoping that you could follow up and maybe clarify a bit about what you mean about paramodern planning as a sort of way to fix the current suburban situation and address the sort of larger urban crisis.
Great. It's always good to hear from Portland. I hope things are well with my friends at Portland State. So yeah, that's a really good question. In the sense of the integrated ideal, no, I don't think that. I don't think that restoring either the actual or the dreamt of institutional structures of the Keynesian era is the answer. I mean, so part of what I'm trying to get to with the idea of paramodernism is how do we capture some of the good bits of the modernist era, right? For me, that is, again, some of the ability to do relatively large-scale infrastructure planning. Some of the solutions for some of the far-off suburbs do involve systems of large-scale mobility. I live in France part of the year, and I'm a big believer in the possibility of high-speed rail. I think it can be a brilliant system. As a Californian, I don't necessarily like how water is used. I don't like necessarily the way in which the politics of water are done, but the ability to move large volumes of water, I don't think is an inherently bad thing, and is in fact actually necessary. So I think that there are some abilities to operate at this scale. I think that there are aspects of this infrastructural ideal when it came to having the federal government or perhaps the state government acting as a large-scale financing, which are particularly useful. I also am a believer in resurrecting the idea of progress. I mean, part of paramodernism is to be able to recapture some of the dreams of the notion of progress, which I think have been undone, right? In some ways, rightly critiqued by postmodernism in all of the various posts. But the problem with progress wasn't an inherent, not that the idea of progress is inherently bad, it's just that the way that progress was conceptualized was exclusive, was uncreative, ad nauseam. So I do think, so that's the basic idea, is how do we recapture some of these possibilities? Because I would argue that if we're talking about dealing in California, and this is both in the Northern California and Southern California, some of these far-off exurban spaces that were built under neoliberal conditions, that part of the answer can only be various forms of fairly large-scale infrastructure connectivity. Now, how you do that, how you produce this, has to be done differently. So, for instance, one of the things I talk about in a different paper that's in regional studies called Rethinking Region is to talk about various forms of what I would call tactical sub-regionalism. So, again, one of the a component of the long-standing rational planning modernist dream is the fantasy of regional government, fed by the supposed wonders of the Portland example, which in fact Portland has done a really great job, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Portland can be applied elsewhere. So rather than in a place like the Bay Area, which is increasingly has sprawled and connected into a variety of other regions, you cannot, it is impossible to develop a governance structure where the geography of intervention, the scale at which we create a political, we draw the polygon and we say, this is the scale at which governance is happening. It's at, this is how we define the region, or it's mega-regional, and this is how we define the mega-region. We will never be able to create a governance structure at the scale at which the problems occur. And I think we have to be a lot more tactical. So use this example of the way in which the freeway is produced. And this kind of sub-regional cooperation, I think actually, the problem is that it had to happen, and it was done in a very unfunded, abandoned way, where the state and the federal government didn't provide the support to this sub-regional agency, and they had to essentially build a freeway on their own. The answer is to not remove this sub-regional cooperation that was been built, but to provide it with more support and provide it with more funding. But still, I think the solving of large-scale infrastructure programs has to have problems. Generally, again, they don't occur at the scale of the region. They occur in particular subparts of the region where the problems are. And I think you need to build new governance structures in that area that are different than traditional government structures, but that really the true dream of governance includes community-based organizations, civil society organizations, different scales of government, and business. That is a bit of an answer to your question. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what I mean by modern. It is an idea very much in formation.
Okay, Alex, did you finish your answer?
Yes.
That's great. And Anthony Levenda, would you like to reply anything to this?
Hello. I don't have any specific comments back for Alex, but I appreciate that answer. That helps me understand a bit where you're coming from and where paramodern planning might be sort of different than the historical sort of tradition of modernist planning. So yeah, I think we can pass it on to whoever's next.
And just by way of statement, I have a feeling just today's conversation will probably bring up a lot of topics and leave a lot of things somewhat unresolved. And please don't hesitate to email me directly to discuss certain things more.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks a lot. I agree with you both. Now we have a question from Olivier Roy, and he already told me that he can't speak, so he's going to write his question on the chat room, in which everybody can read it. And I'm going to read it in order to have this consistent with in our MP3 file that after this chat you will be able to download from the screen, from the Moodle platform. By the way, I'm here also to giving you greetings from Yuri Katsetov, which had some classes today, so he probably will not be able to join us. but he gives you greetings, sends you greetings. So Olivier writes, sorry if this is a gigantic question that would require days to answer it fully, but I could not help to wonder about this when I was reading your paper. If the North American metropolis is indeed an hyper-diverse, physical, massive, and political dysfunctional universe, how can we learn to live and adapt in it? As we say, we must, page 666. How can we govern ourselves and plan and develop our territories together to fight and adapt to climate change, preserve forests and agricultural land from dispersed suburbanism, and reduce socioeconomic inequality in the face of the hegemony of global and regional neoliberalism that exacerbates this phenomena? Given that the solutions to these unresolved problems lie neither in the imaginated past, nor in the uncertain future, what can we take from our present growth machine to take on our most pressing social, political, and environmental challenges? It seems to me that the ideas you put forward in your last session about paramodern planning and growth have been widely acknowledged and deemed as desirable, but virtually every rational and intelligent individual for many years now, yet a wider array of political and economical forces keep preventing their implementation. In short, why is that so, and what can we do to overcome them? Please, Alex.
This is a gigantic question. So it's good to hear from my favorite cities, my dream city, Montreal. So a few points I would make. So one is a little bit, again, to repeat what I talked about. I think that we need, and this is something that I will put it up there. This needs to be something, it's something I talk about in this regional studies paper that I mentioned. I will post the citation in a second. I think one of the biggest problems that we have politically, that our scale of analysis, we assume that there is a relationship between the self-analysis and the scale of intervention. I think that we need to sever that assumption. I think that we can have these big global, regional, mega-regional, large-scale analyses, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the scale at which we can intervene. Now, that also doesn't necessarily mean that I'm against national and global and regional scale interventions, but the scale of the problem and the scale of the intervention are not necessarily related. And I think that we need to do a little bit better job. So sometimes you see, again, big global environmental challenges, forest preservation. I can do that. Some of the problems are the is that better? Awesome. So when it comes to solving problems, again, there might be a point where you have to solve them at a much smaller scale. Again, that doesn't mean an adherence to localism. I would argue that we have a real problem with fetishizing particular scales of engagement. There's a group of us who are ardent localists, smaller is better. There's a group that are like, no, this is a global problem, it has to be solved globally. I think you have to deal with the particular problem that you're facing and figure out what for you and your collectivity, your organization, your city, your town, your organization at what scale can you be effective at dealing with any of these problems? So in the case of East County, this particular area that I'm talking about, I think that East County, for these kind of tactical sub-regional coalitions can be very effective at dealing with some of the inequality issues. I also think that, again, these tactical sub-regional coalitions can be very effective at the preservation of agricultural land, because in this situation, power for agricultural land preservation is fairly rooted in these local towns. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the state of California doesn't necessarily need to do things. And I think you are seeing, you do see a kind of a multi-scalar approach to things. So one is, again, I would separate out the scale from the scale of analysis. Two is I love the idea of Louis that these things that I'm saying have been widely acknowledged and deemed as desirable, but I would say that you're not. I don't think that that is in fact the case. I still think that we have a massive tendency to view certain places as problems in and of itself. Generally, the places in which poor people live. I think we have a general, the urban community has been divided by debates over sprawl, debates over the form and the type of metropolis that we're supposed to have. So I don't think that there is the type of perhaps collective acknowledgement that you would argue that there should be. And I think that there does need to be a certain amount of rallying. I wish that you were right. And so there's a few other pieces that I've been writing now about trying to search for the solution to the problem. So I don't know if anybody's had a chance to read my exceptionally polemical Debating Urban Studies in 23 Steps. I'll start to put some of these up there. I didn't come here to shill for my own work. It just seems to be working out this way. But I would agree. I think we need to start working for some solutions. And for the critical urban studies community, which I would argue is the IGER community, I think that there are a few big things that we need to do. One of, again, I don't have time to go through all 23 steps, but one of them, for instance, is to rethink the importance of the possibilities of the academy. I think fundamentally the political system that we have for the production of space is broken. I don't think we have a politics that is capable of delivering, just like you said, we don't have a politics that is capable of delivering the type of environment that we need. And how do we achieve that? Well, we need to re-examine all of the institutions that are part of it. And it's so many academics spend all of their time banging on about what other institutions should or could do. But I think that we need to look at ourselves, some of the radical ways that we can intervene as the academy. I think that we have to, for instance, put ourselves in a position where we run the discursive debating process by which ideas are discussed. Again, when the state wants to do something, it does a consultation, participatory planning process where the state runs the process and then the state decides. This is ludicrous, right? We need a different system, and I would argue that the academy has a piece of it. All right, so now I'm getting. I'm used to big discussions. I'm not used to being chatted at and discussed at the same time. So I will start. I can upload directly, Giovanni, right?
Yes, you could, but if you experience any troubles, you just send it to me by email or by a link on Dropbox, and I can upload by myself. So whatever is more convenient for you.
You all keep asking questions, and I'll just start sending Giovanni lots of things.
Okay, that's
fine. So Olivier, for your solution-oriented question, the polemics are all coming out in city.
Okay, Olivia has just replied. Thanks for your answer. And I could not agree more on what you say about disentangling the scale of analysis and of intervention. I just downloaded your debating urban studies in 23 steps, and there is a link. And we'll make sure to read it through ASAP. Looking forward to reconnecting with you to discuss this issue further. Okay, so if you can send it back to me, I can upload it on the Moodle platform to allow all our participants to easily download it. Okay, Alex?
Sounds great. I'm also
okay,
going to
now,
include...
please.
Just so you know, I will also include a couple other pieces. One is, so again, the regional studies piece talks about the separation of the scale of analysis from the scale of engagement, and talks about tactical subregionalism, which is, again, part of the solution to the problem, I would argue. I will also include the Debating Urban Studies in 23 Steps piece, and now I'm sending Giovanni two other pieces, one of which is Madden's response to this 23 Steps piece, which is coming out of the next issue of City, and my response to his response. Since both of the things that I'm sending you are in proof form, I would appreciate it if you did not send around the second pieces, Madden's response and my response. Those should be online soon, and as soon as I have a proper copy, I'm happy to distribute it to anybody who wants it, if you don't subscribe to City, or your institute doesn't subscribe to City.
The Moodle platform is one, so just our participants can access it. So it's up to them, as you say, to avoid sharing in the external with the public, let's say, anything which is not appropriate. There is also another possibility for keep discussing about this. In your section on the Moodle platform, there is also a forum in which you can keep discussing. Normally it happens when, of course, here we don't have enough time for disentangling all the issues. So you could use that, and you could discuss also about these other articles in the forum. Now we have Dylan Mahmoudi. I'm opening his microphone to see if he is able to speak with us. And Dylan, can you try to speak?
Yeah, hey Alex. Thanks for your article. And I just put the 23 debates in urban studies up in the forum so that we can all access that. Hey, so your focus on urban crisis as the source of suburbanization of poverty and kind of the suburbanization of marginalized groups is well taken. It's a great analytical tool. I do want to connect that with the 23 debates in urban studies paper because, you know, we also read that at Portland State.
I heard that this is being read.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, quite a bit. And so, you know, you say in that paper that we must kind of revive and reimagine sustainability as a failed coalition rather than one of neoliberalism. And you also say that we kind of must focus on land and profit. And so if we bring that conversation to the progressive cities of the West Coast, what we see is that the sustainability discourse is used precisely for the kind of urban injustices and disproportionate applications of capital. And well, we don't have to point our finger at neoliberalism or kind of the bourgeois environmentalism or global greenwashing. We still see the process of urbanization and suburbanization using the different kind of growth coalitions or discourses kind of in very problematic ways. And some of my colleagues have put a paper out on urban geography about that in Portland. And I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on how we might be able to resolve this with what you call a paramodern planning.
Okay, so that's a really good question, and actually, this is the heart of this is in some ways the part about sustainability. We can talk about perhaps later the specific relationship between land and profit and all of my neo-Georgist leanings later. But yeah, the fundamental argument in the book version of this, which is due, my draft is due in a few weeks, is about this failed coalition, right? Is that when the idea of sustainability came about, I think it was great in one sense, in that it represented an important change from the environmental community, that to recognize that there was something beyond saving the birds and the trees, which are very important, but that there was this human aspect that they were ignoring. But the problem is that way sustainability was conceived was not the way. There was a disconnect between the way it was conceived and the way it was operationalized. And so what I talk a lot about in the book version is how the story of California is about the failure of the Obama coalition. San Francisco, if you define the Obama coalition as essentially middle class, environmental leaning progressives, organized labor, communities of color, social justice advocates, essentially all of the different, many of the different groups, a fair of actually kind of somewhat well-intentioned, kind of high-tech capital Silicon Valley types who are, again, big donors to the Democratic Party. The San Francisco Bay Area has had this Obama coalition for my entire life. I'm 40. This coalition has been the dominant numerical group. But when when the idea of sustainability evolved in the 90s, they never thought it in terms of doing that coalition building. Right? It wasn't like, okay, we need to make sure that we're really reaching out to advocates for social justice. They thought that they could sort of intellectualize a solution to the problem. Start talking about equity without actually including advocates for equity in the full sphere. So in the book, I trace all of these examples of attempting to do sustainable regional development planning, which largely fail because they don't, the people that are driving them are these fairly middle-class bourgeois environmentalist types, of which, again, I'm talking about the community that I come from, just simply failing to reach out and build these kinds of relationships. So to me, this isn't the paramodern part. This is just old school coalition building that just never really happened. Again, you just keep looking at the history of Bay Area sprawl and development, and it was just divided politics. I do some studies of Contra Costa County, which is, kind of one of this is the prototype sprawling county, and you look at the way the politics worked during the 90s and 2000s. And part of the reason why sprawl was able to happen is that the development community, which was pushing sprawl, never had to face like a unified Obama coalition where social justice advocates and environmental advocates were able to pool resources and pool power. If they had been able to pool resources and power, I think they would actually have been able to make some changes. And they were never willing to do so. I think, and that I think is fundamentally the problem. So to me, it's not really a problem of paramodernity. That's more the planning side of things. That's more the imagination side of things. This is just old-fashioned politics. And part of the problem is I think that there's a schism and a limited imagination. And this is maybe the paramodern part, right? Again, part of modernism that I liked was the imagination and the possibility of a city that was better. Again, there are aspects of Brasilia that are really interesting and really cool. And I think, we're all students of urban studies. We know the good, the bad, and the ugly of the history of, from the utopian socialists to this day. But there's an aspect of that imagination that I think we've largely lost. I think the politics is one of really limited imaginations, of sort of cynicism, of an assumption that things are largely going to continue as they are, and of allowing, we've never utilized this potential coalition that we have in the Bay Area. And so it's just a matter of getting folks to sit down at the table and hammer out some sort of set of agreements centered around the urban. This is maybe the other part and the other real deep purpose of the argument. You know, I'm a fire-breathing urbanist, which means I believe, you know, I'm not much of an ideologue, but the only part of my ideology that really sticks is my belief that Henri Lefebvre was right. Right in the sense that the urban has supplanted the industrial as the dominant mode of production. And this means the urban, if the urban is the dominant mode of production, the urban needs to be more central to our politics. So I talk at the end of the 23-step space about how I think for thousands of years, one of our biggest problems is that we have essentially a politics-centered urban. We try to imagine a type of political relationship, set of relations, a set of way of doing things, and then we apply it to the systems to be governed. I think the way to utilize this Obama coalition in the progressive, supposedly progressive cities of the West Coast, and this is true, again, in a lot of other cities in which I've operated. You know, I would argue it's true in large parts of northern England now, and parts of France where I operate, and again in the cities that I know, is placing the urban at the center, right? Trying to imagine the possibilities of new coalitions, new politics around these systems, develop bespoke politics for the systems, and not try to attach a particular set of political ideologies to the governance of the systems. And that's enough for now. But this is a much bigger question, and we'll talk about the land. Hopefully somebody will ask a question about land and property later.
Great, thanks for that, Alex. But one of the things you said was that these groups were never willing to form coalitions.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, I can't speak for the Bay Area example, but one of the things that I've seen in Portland and say Seattle is that the groups that some groups were marginalized, and many of them did have kind of urban visions or did understand the value of the urban, and actually kind of maybe defragmenting the urban or regional landscape. And so I'm curious to, you know, I'm just excited for the book to kind of see how you kind of tackle that issue in the book. But thanks again, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, and I don't know that the specific politics of each region are going to be different. You know, we in the Bay Area had a very large and powerful tradition of African American politics, of Latino politics, of Asian American politics, in addition to sort of union politics, et cetera. There was a very, very well developed kind of counterforce. And part of the problem, right, is that team social justice and team environment were both big and strong. So is team capital. Everybody is, you know, a lot of big, powerful actors. We've been big and fancy and rich and global for a really long time. In other areas, right, like, again, I don't know Seattle, but I would imagine Seattle having a more developed environmental community and a lesser developed social justice community. Maybe I'm wrong. So there might be power imbalances in that way. It wasn't the same level of power imbalance in California in some ways. I mean, there's another problem in California, is that the state of California spent the majority of the 1980s and 90s declaring war on people of color, just existentially, one initiative after another. And so that's actually where my hope lies, is that my hope, the era of sort of trying to push people of color out of the state of California is over. And that's a world historic event. California has been at war with its communities of color since 1848. So it finally ended sometimes in like 2005 or something like that. That's a long time. So hopefully some of the healing processes happen, and I think there's some real possibilities of this supermajority mega coalition. The challenge is I don't know whether they understand the urban enough and in enough complicated ways. But that's again another story for another day.
That's great. Let's go on with our participants. Now we have a comment by Laura Wentz. And Laura, your microphone is open, so you already posted your question, so you can read it aloud. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Giovanni. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Alex, for the paper, which was very informative, especially or even for somebody that doesn't know the Bay Area, except from papers and maps and LA school sort of paradigms. And I also really appreciated the journalistic incisions. And I watched the trailer for Medicine for Melancholy, and I really want to get a copy now and watch it. And so I really appreciated these side notes.
Yeah.
And so like Anthony, I also got very intrigued by the whole paramodern proposition in your article, and especially by the quote that a paramodern growth machine is one capable of embracing the DIY urbanism of micro-enterprise and micro-agriculture and strong ethic of urban thrift, while simultaneously being unafraid to build the transportation and fiscal infrastructure to provide for the middle-class dreams of the most diverse generations of citizens in history. So just playing devil's advocate here in terms of the languaging, does the conjunction of this hybrid paramodernism with this growth machine language again lead to a fetishization of growth over incremental consolidation or even degrowth sort of ideas? And probably also connecting to what you just mentioned, what place does capitalism, that has been drawn into question still have within these paramodern futures? And lastly, I'd be really interested if you could elaborate on what embracing these paramodern ideals would mean for the urban left, and maybe here you can explain this separating scale of analysis from the scale of engagement that you just mentioned in passing, and that I would really love to hear more about. So yeah, it's also a mouthful of question.
Yeah, that was a lot. I appreciate the quantity of questions that you all are capable of incorporating in one question. It's brilliant. So, and by the way, I'm really enjoying my internet stalking of all of you on now, because I know now a little bit about all of you. So you'll have to say hi to Miriam for me, Laura. She's one of my favorite French urbanists. So. It's great to have the question. Let me see where I can begin. So yes, I mean, part of what I guess, if you really want to see where I'm trying to expose myself to critique by my fellow members of the left, it's around challenging some of the, again, arguing that we need to co-opt the growth machine as opposed to stop it. Yeah, that does, I guess, put me in conflict with some of the degrowth folks. Whereas I love the sort of challenge to the tyranny of economic growth, and again, I am increasingly vicious in my critique of environmentalism as an organized movement. I do love environmental economics. I do believe in some of this steady state economics. I like Paul Hawken and my Amory Levins. I like my parts of Herm Daly. So I do think that getting away from growth as a demand is an issue, but the fact remains is that population is growing. I mean, 7 billion people, we're going to get 8 billion people. I think we're going to get 9 billion people. So as long as there are more humans, there needs to be growth in that sense. The other aspect, and this is where the paramodern comes in, right? Growth as a term has been like co-opted by the sort of official machine. And I think growing is a wonderful thing, right? Plants grow, I grow as a human. To grow as a city means to change, right? It's this recapturing of the notion of progress. I want to boil down paramodernism to anything. It is a political attempt to recapture the possibility of progress and turn progress back. Remember that progress used to be something that as a leftist we were part of. Right? I would argue that we are so scarred by the sins of leftists, our sort of involvement in modernism. We were so scarred by that. And we're continuing to be sort of scarred by, like, as we see various forms of kind of paternal global south intervention in the name of progress by supposedly well-meaning progressive NGOs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that has withdrawn into a kind of an anti-progress, again, or an anti-growth. I'm okay questioning how we define growth, questioning the need for economic growth defined as X, Y, and Z, but to seed the concept of growth or the idea of a growth machine, you know, something that some sort of socio-political system that produces economic growth, again, economic growth redefined, I think we can't cede territory on that. Same with entrepreneurialism, same with creativity, same with all of these words that are really good things that I think that we've allowed Richard Florida, et cetera, to sort of use and abuse these terms. So I'm not giving an inch. I'm not allowing anybody to just sort of sully the concept of these sort of terms. And that, in some ways, it's at the heart of the kind of my sort of parapolitics. It's how to recapture those areas. Now, again, some of this has to do with the particular kind of economics of the place talking about. I'm deeply sympathetic to the parts of Eastern Germany, to the parts of, you know, the Rust Belt in the United States. I mean, I now live in a shrinking region in Leeds. Leeds itself is not shrinking, but the north of England overall has lost population in the last census for the first time in history. So I'm deeply sympathetic for what that means economically and socially, and it definitely requires a different set of procedures. But the San Francisco Bay Area, where the case in question, is a place where, again, the economic growth being driven by economic growth policy has to do with a kind of accident of history of sitting on the biggest economic gold mine probably in human history. I mean, nobody has ever experienced this type of sustained, insane economic growth. I mean, there was some recent data released that showed the average salary one needed to buy the average house in that city. And the average salary in San Francisco was 50% higher than the average salary in New York City, which was the next highest city. It's twice Seattle. It's almost 3 times Portland. So we're talking about totally next level growth that has happened. Again, not necessarily as a result of policy. And I think, therefore, again, from a planning perspective, the growth is there. Humans are coming, and we're not providing for housing, welfare, schooling, education, water. We're just not providing. And again, this is the difference about what we do. You know, we are urbanists. We are part of the production of things that have to be produced. Like I love, you know, I mean, I love the Logan and Molich book. I love Urban Fortune. I think it's one of the best urban books ever. And they're right to question some stadiums don't need to be built. Some convention centers are not necessary. Certain forms of office development are not like vital to human society. But the urban is. We need to be pouring more capital into the production of a useful urban. The problem of an overdeveloped, all of this capital flowing into London isn't that it's flowing into the urban, right? It's that it's flowing into the wrong forms of the urban that are being used for the wrong reasons. But that injection of capital into the urban, as opposed to into other forms of economic activity, I think is actually a very good thing. I love the idea. I think that, again, Lefebvre is right. Like David Harvey, you know, again, who I love, but is actually sort of anti-urban at his core. He thinks this capital switching is a bad idea. Because again, as an old-fashioned Marxist, to sort of fetishize the factory. Well, I'm a postmodern child. I don't fetishize factory. I don't necessarily want to work at one. I'm an environmentalist. I don't necessarily want us to continue to producing widgets. I like the idea that the economy is increasingly centered around the production of space, and I want capital to go into that, but I want us to measure growth in a different way. That's part of being paramodern in some ways, right? Recognizing social capital investments in space, recognizing all the different forms of capital investment and what it actually means to profit. And I guess as a final point, it comes down to the capitalism critique. And this is something that I'm trying to work on a little bit more theoretically and be able to sort of articulate it better than I do in the city piece. But I do think, again, there is one of the biggest problems that we have in terms of progressive urbanism is that we don't insist enough on a differentiated understanding of capitalism. So first of all, like, there's a certain amount of, like, there will always be people with capital risk. And I think it's fine. It's just a matter of risk about what. I'm okay if you take a risky investment in some sort of space flight technology. I actually think that that's really good. I think capitalism is a great system for the production of space stuff, and bless his heart, Richard Branson, if he wants to invest in it, and if he makes 100% return on investment, great. I think capitalism is a really great system for the production of beer. Beer has never, Portland will tell you, the state beer has never been better. It's never been more accessible. It's never been more affordable. It's never been more it's getting more environmentally sensitive. It's being produced in better ways. Like it's really creative and entrepreneurial. The capitalism and beer go really well together. Where capitalism is problematic is in investment in land. Land is a really different entity. So I think we just need to start becoming much more precise instead of criticizing capitalism as a global system, and that just means nothing. I mean, there is no capitalism. There's different forms of capitalism, and I think that we need to be very precise about criticizing the role of capital and certain privatization and return on investment for the delivery of water, right? Nestle just announced that it doesn't think that humans have a natural right to water. Well, Nestle is evil, and they are wrong. But I actually think, but again, when it's to their attempts to curtail water, right? Nestle's involvement in other forms of the production of chocolate are different. Now, again, chocolate is done in a very colonial way, but that's a different problem. That's solving an older problem, right? That's not arguing that there is no role for capitalism in the production of chocolate. So it's just about separating this out, and I think that's how we can be much more effective, too. We don't assert the urban perspective enough and show how we're different and show how it can be more precise and help us wade through. Again, the capital versus labor era is over. That's 20th century. I mean, I'm a good socialist, but not about everything. I'm happy to be a socialist when it comes to land, and be a capitalist when it comes to space exploration.
Okay, now I'm opening again Laura when a microphone so she can interact. I see she writes something, but she can speak. Yeah. Please, Laura.
Thank you so much, Alex. I couldn't agree more on so many things you said, except for the fact that German beer has, for example, always been great. There was no need for capital intervention.
Without a doubt, my case. I'm suffering in Northern England. Too much real ale. It's like Portland all over again.
I feel your pain. So I totally agree with the notion. So what would be the alternative to growth? It would be probably stagnation or decline, if we are very radical. And I just wanted to say that I see a lot of connections from what you mentioned to the post-colonial urban theory practice or project of recapturing and hacking and transmogrifying what is there, and not just falling into, for example, an anti-urban notion because the city has such a strong connection to the colonial and the neo-colonial. So I think there are some interesting sort of parallels to explore with just accepting and working with what's there. And I'll leave it at that, so other people have also the chance to interact with you.
You're in the center of non-centered urbanism. So since there'll be no new center of urban, there's no more schools. We're done with that. The era of the schools is over. But if there's going to be a sort of capital of future urban studies that is not in a space without capital, I'd say that ACC is good. So I thank you very much. That's very high praise.
That's great. Thank you. Now we have Eddie Spinak. And she told me already that she cannot speak, so she's writing her question. Alex, can you read it aloud so that we have our MP3 consistent?
Yeah. So Abby asks the question about what is the etymology of paramodernism. And so the etymology is relatively simple. Para as a prefix, just it means altered, contrary, beyond. Right? It's a prefix that implies a certain form of transformation of the thing, but that doesn't get trapped in the sort of time-based, the neo and the post. So it's specifically about the transformation. And so you could also use, if I, in the spirit of, my friends, the anti-globalization protesters, you could think of it as a sort of alter modernism, if you would prefer. But since I don't, though I love my anti-globalization protester friends, I don't agree with them on a lot of things. There was no alter modernity, therefore we went with I went with the paramodern. Hope that was clear.
Okay.
My shortest answer yet. I'm very proud of myself.
Yeah, that's good. Don't worry, that's fine. So now the next in line can be Lydia, Katia, and Lydia. Are you able to speak, or are you gonna speak? I'm opening your microphone, Lydia Katia Manzo. Do you want to speak? Try. You can try, but we cannot hear anything. Means that your microphone is not working very well. Nevertheless, you have your question ready. You can post it, and we can do. Okay, please write. I'm closing your microphone again. Okay, I think that we can do like before, Alex.
Yeah. Right.
We have. I just want to say that we have just half an hour left. So we should close in half an hour at 5 GMT UK time. And okay, please, Alex.
So Lydia asked a question about my whether I didn't take into account the work of Manuel Albert in my piece, and you're right.
You can just read it, Alex. Maybe it's easier.
So first, I want to say that I've really appreciated your notes on method and your journalistic way to proceed during the data gathering phase, and also your writing style. And then, coming from a different background in terms of research interests, I have a very simple question, which is a question of clarification. You stated at the very beginning of your paper that the urban nature of the crisis is not to be exclusively rooted in the bubble years of 2002 to 2006. And I was wondering why in your account the work on the geographies of the financial crisis, on the subprime crisis of Manuel Albers. Can you explain this position, if there's any position about? And so you're right. Again, one of the problems with academic time is that the piece was actually written in 2010. I believe. Then by the time it wound its way through review, it was 2000. It was actually published in 2012. I don't know why it won the. It's officially 2013. I'm grateful because it made me eligible for this fantastic prize. But essentially, the piece was written many years before, which is before Manuel's recent work, which I'm starting to follow a lot more in depth because he too is sort of engaging with this Lefebvrean urban revolution question. He too is sort of, there's a whole wave of research sort of going in. Many people may know Brent Christopher's 2011 piece, trying to retest the Harvey interpretation of on capital switching. So yes, if I were to write it all over again, there would definitely be some engagement with Manuel's work, which I don't know as well as I need to. But yes, unfortunately, academic time is my excuse.
Okay, I must say that I know Manuel Albers. He has, in the past, one of the ancestors of this kind of program because he participated to EURBS, which was an international master on urban studies in 2008, I think. So this is interesting that he comes back with this timely connection, let's say. Now we have Lydia. Would you like to add anything more, or we can pass to the next participant? Okay, she said that she's fine. Thank us.
Lydia,
okay,
we can discuss Brooklyn at another time.
Okay, that's great. I must say that in the meanwhile, I uploaded all Alex's new readings, new texts on the forum. So you are able now to and also to comment on them just on the forum. So this is convenient. Now that we have Emily Rosman, I will try to open her microphone to see if she wants to speak. But she just said that she's not. So we have our. This time I'm gonna read so that Alex can rest a bit. Is it all right with you, Alex?
I enjoy doing it, if you don't mind.
Okay, please do it.
So, thank you so much for discussing this article. Going back to your comments on powerful actors in the Bay Area being unwilling to form coalitions with activists and poor people. I'm wondering, you might account for the rapid expansion of what I call philanthropic tendencies on the part of the upper middle class, educated techie crowd in the Bay Area. While philanthropy has a long history and often working in close coordination with modern planning, contemporary philanthropy presents itself in opposition to inefficient or failed city planning. Is it just the extreme wealth of the technology center that allows the tech center in the Bay Area to largely opt out of city and regional planning processes, instead focusing on their own corporate-driven identification and solutions to urban problems? How might we account for the mix of politics and money in this regional economy, such as how Google and Facebook employees are so committed to viewing themselves as socially liberal and hacking urban problems outside traditional views of planning? Once again, a brilliant question. I'm glad to have this intervention from British Columbia. So it's something that's actually very interesting is how just in the period of the time between when I finished my research in 2010, 2011, and today, which is a period of 5 years, how during that time, Silicon Valley and the technology sector became the center of politics in the Bay Area. This wasn't the case for the last 35, 40 years. I mean, they were an important industry. They were just another industry. There were other large, powerful actors. They was not as dominant a force. Part of the reason why they're so dominant has to be with the fact that the products that they make have become increasingly, have permeated all of our lives in a particular way that they hadn't. So it's not just the power of them as technology, as large corporations within a region, but the actual product of what they make, almost like Ford and GM were in an earlier era in Detroit. It was that, it made the thing that got us around, and they were the central economic activity. Part of it also has to do with the changing geography of technology and the fact that they have taken over the capital of the region, i.e. San Francisco, as opposed to being an industry that was largely centered in the South Bay before. I think that you have a really good point, and I would give two answers to it. So yes, I mean virtually every critique of the tech industry is correct, and I think that part of this is a certain problem with the tech industry, both in terms of their self-image, both in terms of their actual understanding of the world. I mean, again, this is the challenge. I mean, we're not talking about a group that by and large has focused on educating itself about the actual existing planet. Most of them have focused on educating themselves on technology finance, and then that's given them the status to pronounce things. So how we can get mass numbers of Google employees into urban studies classes as faster than possible is part of what keeps me up at night. Part of the problem is that, and part of the reason behind my obsession, my kind of desire to develop the notion of paramodernism, is that it's a explicit counter to what I would argue is the slow emergence of a form of neo-modernism. Smart cities, all the new cities, plus all of the sort of hacking, disruptive urbanism, all of this is a form of kind of techno-fetishist neo-modernism that it should be very familiar to us. I mean, these are the new machines for living. These are the new Corbu, this is the replacement for Corbu in the public realm. Architects have for the most part been humbled, and even the most egotistical of today's architects don't even come close to the type of sort of all-encompassing high modernism that of Corbu or of the current kind of technology mafia. That being said, it's not entirely their fault. So part of what I'm trying to struggle with now, I have a paper that was actually the original conclusion of the dissertation, and I'm trying to figure out whether it fits in the book. I sent it out for review to a planning journal, and it got rejected. I don't know where to put it. But part of the problem is how planning in some ways defines itself. So the planning establishment has allowed a narrow understanding of what constitutes planning. So thus, inefficient or failed city planning can be seen, it's almost a form of othering, to continue our post-colonial conversation, right? Is that there's this thing called planning. It's done by somebody who is in fact not me. It is the state or the other. Somebody else does the planning. When the city doesn't work, it's a failure, and the failure is obviously not my fault or my organization's fault or my business's fault. It's somebody else's fault. And it's this constant process of kind of passing the buck. So I think the biggest challenge for those of us who are planners, and I haven't done a full analysis of who here, I know my friends from Portland State are planners officially. I don't know whether any of you else are planners or identify as such. But part of the challenge, I think, is that we desperately need to redefine planning. Planning, as I think about it, needs to be reimagined as the intentional and institutional production of space. Any time that any organized group of more than one attempts to collectively intervene in the making of the city, that is planning. It doesn't matter whether the state is officially or unofficially involved. And we need to, the reason why this is so important is because this definition of planning changes the responsibility of for planning to a much broader set of organizations. Apple is a planning institution. Google is a planning institution, right? Twitter specifically engaged with the city of San Francisco around the redevelopment of mid-market area. That was an act of planning. They were doing just as much planning as the city of San Francisco. So they bear just as much responsibility for the successes and failures. And I think the same is true for environmental organizations, social justice efforts, et cetera. And so this is part of the point. I think, since I haven't been able to succeed since I was rejected in like 72 hours by JAPA for this argument, because I found it too preachy. And they argue that in some ways what I'm saying is just talking about governance. No, but that's the problem. One of the problems that planning theorists or planning academics want to, anytime we talk about sort of going beyond the state definition of planning, they say, well, we talk about governance and it's the same thing. Well, no, it's not the same thing. It's a different word. Most humans don't know what governance is. I mean, governance is not a normal word in normal language, but planning is. Almost every citizen knows that there's this thing called the city and knows that there's this thing called planning. but we associate it too much with, again, technocratic rule, the state, and we fail to take responsibility, and we fail to define planning the way planning is actually done, which is a complex set of interventions, again, which is governance. Planning is governance, but we haven't redefined planning. So I think as much as I like to call my techie friends on the carpet and get them to understand the city better and take responsibility, I think some of it lies with those of us in planning and the need to redefine planning from within. So Olivier, I would argue that you are a planner. Sorry. It's okay. Just own it. I'll buy you the t-shirt. Sorry.
That's
Giovanni,
fine.
I'm totally violating the rules of the, I should be reading the chat, not, do you want me to read the chat or no?
No, that's fine. That's fine. Don't worry. Anyway, we are gonna record this too also in audio video. By the way,
so you're all planners. I'm sorry. That's the answer.
well, not all participants are planners.
Oh, but I'm sure that they are involved in the intentional and institutional production of space. Thus, I define them. Dylan and I are going to define you all as planners. Welcome.
Okay. Okay. If you want. Okay. I wanted to say something to you since I don't see that there are rising hands. Virtually. I think that you can post some maps if you want, because you haven't done that, and I think that can be useful for us in analyzing what you were saying.
Okay, yeah, we talked about this yesterday. I'm just not sure what maps would be useful. But perhaps, I'm very happy to talk in very specific terms if there was anything that was unclear about what, in terms of the interpreting them that are in the article. I am also a geographer, so I do love the maps, but I'm just not quite sure what would be useful.
I don't know. I'm even more competent than you, less competent than you. I'm a legal sociologist, so I'm even a bit farther away.
Yeah, I like to make fun of both lawyers and sociologists, so now I have two.
You can make both at once with a legal sociologist.
Yeah, but maybe if there are perhaps if there are other questions that people have or comments about any particular aspect, there are many ways of critiquing or of discussing. Perhaps otherwise, I'm happy to search around for a particular map. There is one.
Yeah, I don't see any raised hands, so I don't think that there is.
Oh, I'm discovering that you can chat at me directly, I think. So.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
Olivier Olivier is announced.
Laura, which. Please.
Let's hear more about the politics of planning writing. Oh, fantastic. So Abby would like to hear more about the politics of planning writing, as would Laura. So can you, Abby, will you just give me a little bit more of a sense of what you mean by that? So, this is a challenge. So Abby asks, for example, who in your perfect world would your audience be? I think, this is one of the great challenges that I think many of us in the Progressive Academy have. So for many years, and so then Laura and Abby also asks, how do you want your writing to be put to work politically? So there are a variety of things. I mean, so for a while, for the longest time, I was a writer with the Polis blog, which from 2010 through 2012 was pretty successful I think at becoming a fairly good venue for some interesting writing about cities, and it was a collective blog. That was really particularly useful as a way for me to reach beyond an academic audience. But I think so if we're talking about pieces of advice, if we're talking about, that was really, this got me through the dissertation period and the academic writing period. I had spent, 10 years as an organizer and an activist before going, I started my PhD at 32. So it took me a long time to get over the academic, the fact that I was now all of a sudden writing for an academic audience. And so this was a really useful way of doing it. But I've also, there's a few other things I would do. Is that increasingly the Academy, this is actually one thing I will say very positive about the UK Academy, is that the UK Academy is actually more supportive officially of public intellectual engagement than the American Academy. So whether it's, blogosphere, Twitter, Facebook is a bizarrely interesting place, right? Where you get like you become friends with David Harvey and Alan Scott on Facebook. It's just such a bizarre. Tom Slater, if you're on Facebook, you should follow Tom Slater. He's one of the most, he just leave with joy, and make you laugh, and also post terrible things about terrible things going on. So I use social media. I increasingly trying to. Right now, what I'm trying to do is in the San Francisco Bay Area case, I'm right now working with Urban Habitat and hopefully Cisco, which are some of the groups I've worked for a long time. I'm trying to produce a new report together with my colleague Desiree Fields on some of the post-foreclosure landscape. So again, just working direct. Like the one thing I will say is, if you're talking about having your writing put to work politically, I think that we need to take control over that. I think there was, in an older version of the Academy, you could do the writing, do the thinking, put it out there, and then have it taken up by other people. And I don't think that works well or works anymore. So I try to control a little bit more how that goes. I'm simultaneously with my colleague Desiree Fields trying to write something for Urban Habitat. There'll be a policy brief for them in their fight against essentially Blackstone and the large capital that's been moving in to buy up foreclosed homes. And together with Desi as well, we are doing some research on rental-backed securities. So this is the securitization. Right? Instead of securitizing mortgages, which is what caused the crisis in the first place, they're now securitizing the rent from the previously foreclosed homes that the big capital has now purchased after the crisis. Yet you cannot invent the effed upness of it all. So we're working on trying to write a policy brief for the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. The Federal Reserve Bank is of Cleveland too. Like some of the Federal Reserve Banks are a surprisingly important and progressive source of good policy analysis. I'm also trying to work towards I did a special issue, or my work was I was basically given an issue of SPUR, which is the San Francisco Planning and Urban Association. I have a magazine called The Urbanist that they publish every month, and I had an issue of that in 2012, and I'm trying to get myself another issue for 2015. So a lot of that is very California Bay Area focused. I think a lot of you will be in positions where, because of the nature of academic life, we become detached a little bit from the communities that we're from or that we do research about, and that's an area where, in fact, we can be most effective politically. Right? I know that I can't be effective in Washington. I know that nobody knows me in Sacramento. I know that nobody knows me in Geneva, the UN, all these various places. I know I can be, even though I'm 10,000 miles away from the Bay Area, I'm trying to be sort of focused on how I engage at that scale. The second is I do now have a project starting up in the UK, which is entirely based on sort of attempting to change the future of the northern part of this island. So there's a lot of politics right now in terms of devolution. In terms of devolving powers down from Whitehall to the various cities in the north. A lot of it is very urban focused, a lot to do with urban infrastructure. And so I'm using my experience working in third sector organizations and activist organizations to try to build a new coalition or a new set of coalitions to try to build power for civil society organizations within devolution, because the way it's happening is sort of stuck within kind of traditional British politics, which is like labor unions and political parties and business groups, and a very sort of sealed off, closed off conversation where the volunteer and charity associations are there to sort of pick up the pieces. And devolution, I don't, if it's going to be successful, has to operate outside. So in that, I'm really just trying to be sort of not an activist. I'm trying to do what I talk about in the city pieces, right? Trying to use the power of the university to establish the university as a new kind of institution in the center, establish the university at the center of a political coalition that can intervene and alter the politics of the future of the north of England. But again, that is something that I'm particularly able to do because now I've done what I think many of you are hoping to do, which is to climb over the wall that is doctoral and postdoc education and get to the point where you have that permanent academic job. As of today, actually, I'm off probation, so I have a full-time proper job, and I spend a lot of time in the, in purgatory and a lot of time in the activist space, and I'm determined to, I am an exceptionally lucky human being, and I feel like we have the ability to transform this university into something that can really, again, produce awesomeness, like produce and have higher expectations of itself. So that's how I'm trying to intervene here. In other places, I don't know. I'm going to try to do some writing. I do some writing on race in France, and in that case, don't know how to make it politically useful. That might be one of those things where sometimes there are spaces where you just write something as an academic and put it out there, and sometimes it works. Again, it's incredible to hear that Portland State is reading my Debating Urban Studies in 23 Steps piece. Every once in a while, I mean, one thing that's nice is that, when this piece won this award, like all of a sudden I'm getting emails from all over. So sometimes the old-fashioned academic way of just getting your heart out, writing something you really believe, writing something really intellectual, writing something that is rigorously researched and rigorously considered and sending it out there, sometimes it works and it engages people. And so I just think, try to do everything. But yes, thank you, Laura. I thought I had crossed the River Styx a while ago, but in fact, now I'm officially on the other side. And someday, hopefully, most of you will be as well, those of you who want to be.
I think that this discussion has been really inspiring for all of us. So thank you very much, Alex, not just for the contents of what you said, but also for the inspiration and also the hope that you are giving to us, because this is important. And I think we need to thank you again. And if there is no further comments, we can close the discussion. Knowing that,
can I make one final thank you and statement?
Of course you can. Please.
So just two things. So I guess you'll now all have my Debating Urban Studies in 23 Steps piece, which I will partially please some of you and hopefully infuriate a few other of you. But it is meant to be the kickoff of a debate section. It's finally happening. I've got a debate coming in on the idea of the utility of the concept of gentrification in cities of the Global South, which is coming online. I've got a great set of debates lined up at AAGs. So if anybody's going to be at either the Urban Affairs Association conference in Miami or the AAG conference in Chicago, I'm doing 3 different debates. One, if you can imagine, between Teresa Caldera, Christian Schmidt, and Michael Storper, about sort of the value of redefining the urban and its impact on justice, which I think will appeal to a lot of you. One on the utility of the concept of resilience, and one on the question of whether radical redevelopment is possible. But the point of that was to both invite all of you to come to those sessions at AAG if you're going to be there, but also I really, write. If the debate section at City can be a really sort of special space. I will work with you to get your piece right, but I'm offering you an opportunity and everybody to write the kind of polemical, angry, visionary piece that's erudite and calm at the same time that you're probably not going to be able to write anywhere else. So if it's under 5,000 words and it's fierce and you're taking a position, whether you're debating something that I wrote in 23 Steps or you're debating something totally separately, please be in contact if you want to write. It'd be wonderful to have younger scholars. And the one thing that's nice about City is that we're actually read by a lot of both, like, professional intellectuals in the academy, and a lot of, we're trying to operate in a space where we get a lot of kind of non-professional intellectuals or people who are professionals at other things. So please write, send me emails, send me your papers. It's and if you are in Chicago and you come to one, see me in the hallway or come to one of my sessions, please come up and say hi and introduce yourself. Thank you all. This has been wonderful.
Okay. People were saying that we have also here in our Moodle platform the means for keeping on the discussion. So maybe you can come along either in 1 week or so, and you can check it out what people are saying and what they may be interested in. So let's keep this open.
Yeah, and again, in particular, feel free to. If you bug me and prompt me and to come into the, I might forget. I have a crazy couple of weeks, but I will, send me an email and somebody remind me and I'll hop in.
I just see that you have even a personal website that I was just posting in the chat. So this is one other way in which we can get in touch and stay in touch. Okay. Thanks to everybody. Thank you all for this wonderful experience, and greetings to Yuri, which is doing class today. Okay, and now I'm closing this down. Okay, bye bye, and thank you all.